We holistically tackle root causes of poverty by creating an ownership-based, organized, creative manufacturing ecosystem for our micro entrepreneurs. Industry Foundation's approach helps these communities to access their traditional skill base, organize them into production units, develop products, and then we market it across the globe. This generally gives them a very good means of living, and this is what we call sustainable businesses. Since 2000, we have trained about 30,000 producers, and we have set up two globally compliant producer companies. I'll talk a little bit more about the companies a little later. We are in different states in India. We are in Karnataka, we are in Tamil Nadu, we are in Odisha, we are also in Andhra Pradesh. Proof of concept, these two organizations that we have set up, producer-based companies. One is called Bangalore Greencraft, which came out from Bangalore, but now it's moved to Tamil Nadu because we want to be closer to the raw material. Greencraft was incorporated in 2012 as a private limited company. Produces home accessories for buyers like IKEA, HomeStop, TJ Maxx, and we are at a revenue of approximately 600K US dollars for the last year. Greencraft employs about 4,000 women across 3 or 4 centers, all based in Tamil Nadu. All these, most of them are within 5 to 10 kilometers of walking range, because that's what we want to do. We want them to have the balance of family life and work life. So we have 3 of these centers based in Tamil Nadu. The apparel vertical, we have one of natural fiber is Greencraft, and the apparel is called Ekta. This was incorporated in 2014. It produces apparel and home accessories again. Our major customers are Fab India, Benetton, Mother Earth, Aditya Birla, and our revenue is approximately 600K US dollars. Now these two producer companies based out of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, the proof of impact when we last did a survey was 83% of the producers earn more than their previous job. 73% producers reported higher increased self-confidence at work. 81% producers have increased their savings. 56% increase in producers who have bank accounts. This is because we kind of, first of all, we give them a soft skill training where they are trained on their self, on health, on hygiene, on family, and also financial literacy. So all our producers have bank accounts and all their earnings go directly into their bank accounts. The model is kind of a distributed kind of a model where we have professional management setting up strategic support, yeah, to enable growth. Then we have the producer ownership. We are coaching the women to become owners of this enterprise. We are not the owners. Industry has no ownership on this sectors. We do not have, I mean, other than the professional support that industry gives in these enterprises, the producers themselves are owners. We train them to become entrepreneurs. We have gender equality in the workplace. We have wages explained to them. More than that, we also are getting them connected on a digital societal platform. They are all, they have smartphones on which we give them training. And on the smartphone, we see their quality and product and things like that.
So I just wanted to, sorry, Susan, I just wanted to ask you one clarification. You said that if they, what would they have done if they were not doing this? Could you just paint the picture for us a little bit? Like how would they have been employed?
See, most of the women were not employed. Either they are homemakers or they are probably working in fields.
Okay.
a small sector, small percentage of them, but most of them were home workers.
There was no traditional craft base that they had in their communities at the time.
No, at the time they did not have anything, or probably they were doing, say, for example, tailoring at home. Maybe they were making some blouses for themselves or for the neighbors, things like that. But to a larger scale, they were not really employed or earning anything much. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
So when we talk about the SDGs, we focus on gender equality, decent work for them, and eventually responsible consumption and production, the goal 12. So these are the SDGs that we focus on with our people, our members. The impact areas, as I told you, is, now they have a regular income. Now they have also they have gone up in their society, in the neighbors eyes, in the locality community's eyes. They've gone up in even the standard. And also now they are women entrepreneurs, which has given them the empowerment, to do things on their own. We generally say that, you in this cadre of people, if you give money into their hands, it is well used. It goes to the children's education, it goes towards the health of the family, it goes towards saving. It's all for the woman, and they know how to take care of this. Also improved standard of living for the next generation. And also resilience to life crisis. I mean, any crisis that they have, we are kind of coaching them on how to face it without going under.
Sure. Great. Okay. So, thank you so much for that. I'm now going to ask Mr. Ramesh Menon to tell us about Save the Loom. Save the Loom has a very different story, and I think it's better if you just start the whole picture from the reason why you set up Save the Loom.
Good evening, Susan, Alia, and Suki, and everyone on this session right now. Save the Loom formally began as a natural outcome of what happened during the floods in 2018 in Kerala. I happen to be here, though I'm based in Bombay. I happen to be in Cochin, and the airport was shut. There was nothing much to do, and so the initial first few days of the floods, which started somewhere in the first week of August, we were involved in a lot of social work for relief camps and things like that. And then closer towards the 22nd, 23rd, when the Onam and Eid season came, we had to discontinue that service which we were doing for the district administration and moved on to go back to a normal life, and seeing that the floods are over now, we can get back. So one of those days, I just casually got to know about this craft cluster, which is very close to Cochin, just about 25 kilometers away from here. And the news started filtered that there has been a huge amount of devastation. So out of curiosity is what I traveled one morning, called a friend of mine, and just traveled there to just see what was the impact, what was the damage. Not knowing much about what actually had transpired, and I've not been to that place earlier. So we've been working with Kerala Handlooms and interacting with the government for a long term to bring in certain interventions. And that is how these meetings were going on prior to August. And suddenly this development took place.
So could you talk a little loud, just a little louder? Just a little louder. Yeah.
Okay. So around that time, the first 4 or 5 days, my basic understanding of going the first day and seeing the impact was just to document what happened, because the devastation which I saw there and what was affected, that particular clusters was quite disheartening to see how the entire thing got disintegrated. This particular pocket of Kerala suffered the maximum during the floods. There are more than 75,000 homes destroyed. And this also has a historically relevant space to Kerala, because this is also some of the Miseries belt in Kochi. So it has a lot of relevance in terms of the Jews came and landed here in Chennaimangalam. And today, ironically, in the time that I went post-flood, there were just about 450 odd weavers who are remaining back, which was close to 5 years ago, there were 6,000. And in the last 20 years, Kerala has lost close to 500,000 weavers away from the craft. So this was the background when the floods happened. And Kerala, largely, the weavers are organized under a cooperative movement and system. So there are close to 600 odd cooperative societies which function across Kerala. And it's pretty much organized in that system for the last 40, 50 years. And so this particular area, what we saw, we wanted to just document that. So the first day I went, second day I went back, third, fourth day, then I had another friend of mine, Dinesh Madhavan from Bombay, who joined me. He's an advertising and fashion photographer. So I said, come, let's go and document this. So there was no idea as to what recourse we are trying to provide. We just wanted to take a story and put it across to the world. And I had a meeting with the government towards the first week, end of first week. So I said, let me take this story back to the government and see what is their reaction, because until then there was no visit, survey, or anything seriously done from the government. And this was 6 days after people started coming back from the flood. So the initial calculations when we did and what we heard from the cooperative societies were that there was a massive damage. There were centers which were under 2 meters of water for 4 or 5 days, and a good number of looms were destroyed. So the numbers were kind of floating around, different numbers were coming in. Someone said 600 looms have been destroyed. Somebody had some other numbers. So these were organized into a particular space. There were 4 cooperative societies, which largely forms part of the Chenamangalam belt. And in the vicinity of another 5 kilometers, we had another 3 cooperative societies. So technically about 7 cooperative weaving societies were affected in the flood, which constitute close to about 300 families and 300 weaving families. And 3 of these societies are entirely women run. So as a natural reaction, we took this entire documentation, went on to Trivandrum, presented these to the government and the system officials to try and see what would they be their intent of bringing back, because the conversation which was happening around that time, that this is kind of the last death knell which is hit on them, because it might take 6 months to a year for them to even revive the looms back. So there was a lot of these insecurity and questioning around the last week of August. When we met the government officials and we came back, I realized that we need to step in and we need to start figuring parallel mechanisms to see how we can bring a recourse. Because if you leave these set of artisans for another 6 or 8 months out of work, there are very little chances of them coming back to the same profession. And just today, there's really a handful of them left. So we took a conscious call that let's go each home, each loom, visit of all of them, document it and put it across. So we wanted to tell the story of this is what has happened to an artisan community. Somewhere where 400, 500, 600 people have been affected is a national catastrophic when it comes to, and the news was not coming in. The newspapers or the mediums which we tried in did not have that much of great interest to come and cover. There were few newspapers like the Indian Express which put in a lot of attention. But overall, there was a lot of rumors which started spreading out from there, and it's just about 30 kilometers out from Cochin. And so the basic thing I thought was, when there is WhatsApp and a whole lot of misinformation, let's me put up a website which clearly states what exactly is happening. So we'll record stories, we'll document everything, we'll put the stories out for people to watch. Even then, at that point of thinking, there was no recourse that we were wanting to give them, or we have any grand plan to put it back there. There were 2 incidents which happened immediately the day after I came back from Trivandrum. Is when we were going home to home, we discovered one loom which was functioning. And I was quite taken back because by the time we had visited about 40, 50 homes, and then suddenly you visit one particular place and there's a woman who's still weaving back in just about 10 minutes after the flood that happened. It so happened that this particular lady managed to salvage her loom because her husband was smart enough. So what he did was, when nobody's mind worked, he dismantled the loom and thrust it up on the ceiling of their home and swam away to safety. When they came back after the floods, after 6 days of living in the camp, every loom, every neighborhood household, everything was destroyed, including their own home, but they could manage to salvage their loom. So this man had 2 choices: either to put his loom down and keep crying like everyone else that everything is destroyed, or he could put the loom back and bring his wife back to work. He has 3 daughters, and he chose the latter, to put the loom back. And 10th day of the flood, there was this woman who was weaving in an entire place where close to 275 looms were damaged. So that was my first stepping point towards saying that there can be a situation where we can inspire people, we can bring them back, and we do not need to sit back and look at the government constantly. As we came back to the society that day, fortunately for us, another incident happened, which was kind of, when we look back now, it's like a guiding light which was there for us to show us some direction. So there's this old gentleman who could barely walk, who came with his daughter, and he had a weaver and said, I've been patronizing this weaver for a long time and I would like to pay some money to fix his loom. And I want to pay another amount of money to fix a loom of a specific woman in the name of my wife. And as the conversation happened, he happened to be a former justice of the Bombay High Court, and his wife was the first woman Chief Justice of Kerala. So these two incidents on a particular day within 6 days of us starting the work kind of gave us some momentum to say, okay, there is a ray of hope. Why are we dependent on the system and the government constantly for look for it? Let's go and put the story across and see where it goes. And we put up the website in just about 72 hours. We didn't have the resources. We went to friends, people, and we had the website up and running. And the next question came is, how do I tell people there's a website which could gather information of what has happened in a remote part in Kerala? So one of the fine mornings, I went to another friend of mine who's a designer and an actor. So I said, I have this idea in my mind. I want to have a campaign, just a placard which says, we are with you, Chenamangalam. And on the bottom, I had just put the website name. Her daughter was going to the school. We shot an image, put it on the internet. And the next thing we know, we requested all our friends. By evening that day, the campaign had gone viral. And we had a huge amount of support, which came not just from the fashion industry, from a larger context of people, from film actors to models to regular people shooting these pictures. And interestingly enough for us, they carried the message of simply writing the website name, just the way we had done in our first campaign. In 3 days, the website crashed. We had more than 2,000 emails with us from across the world. And we didn't know what was happening to us because we had mails from, not just from Malayalis, not just from Indian, not just from designer fraternity, but we had mails coming in from Botswana to Ohio to South Wales to, you name the countries, and we had a whole lot of emails asking, how do you want us to support? Because the website did not give any information, it does not even now, as to who we are, who are the people behind, what are our phone numbers. There was just a form which you could fill and say, yes, I want to save a loom, and show your concern. And that mail comes to us, and then we start talking and conversing and to see, what is the interest of wanting to fund something like this. Interestingly enough, in the entire span of things that we happened is, as we went along, we managed to kind of create a kind of a parallel system which the government started relying on us because our information were factual. When the government numbers started faltering, because as per their practice, there were certain weavers who were aligned to multiple societies, and the government numbers were always going up on a higher scale. In our issue, we had a template ready. We had a specific form, which we got filled from every single weaver, which told about the background, what they lost in the flood, what happened to them, what exactly is the money that they require, what is the bank account. So there was a complete documentation process which we conducted over that 2 or 3 weeks. We didn't have people with us. It was just me, my friend, and we took one more volunteer who could just shoot some pictures and videos with us. By the 12th or 14th of September, we had the exact figures with us that 273 looms across 7 societies were affected. Help started pouring in beyond our reason and belief. We did not even have to collect a single penny from the internet. And that was the beauty of it, because as the story spread, people started coming into Chenamangalam, not only from the fraternity, but good organizations like the Rotary Club and other social organizations like the Inner Wheel, and many other people came forward with their donations to fix the looms, and they went and approached different societies. Now, the second challenge that came to us is there were only 4 or 5 people in the entire town who could fix these looms. So how are you going to fix 275 looms with these 5 people when each loom takes about 4 or 5 days to fix? So we are still going back to the 5 months, 6 months period. How do we challenge it? So we tried our own mechanism of getting technicians from different parts of Kerala, technicians from Madurai. They came, they tried, nothing worked because each cluster or each weaving area has a certain way of functioning with their looms and with the way they manage it. So that failed. Fortunately for us, what has happened is the very first day we got the first money, we said, let's start functioning it, let's start fixing it. And we started repairing whatever money came, the looms started getting repaired on day 1. That's September 2nd. 10 days after we reached there, 8 days after we reached there, the first loom had started getting fixed. And so now we wanted to build up the whole awareness of it. And my great idea was, still was not the concern was about money. It was more about sensitizing people that how a natural calamity can come and play havoc with something which has been there traditionally for such a long time. Around September 16th, we had Anjum Modi come to Kerala for some event, and I ensure that she comes and sees what happens. So the message goes forward. We had IMG from Bombay come down with Gautam Wazirani and his team in September third week again to assess what happened and what offer they can, what support they can offer. They got UNDP, they got Goku, the World Bank came in. So as the word started spreading, we had a whole lot of attention, and everybody wanted to come and see what is the impact and how they can try and give their viewpoint or offer support.
And all of this was just in the aftermath, like in 2018. It was
absolutely within the 3 weeks with this thing started moving. By October 2nd, what happened is we wanted to also set a target to achieve and move on. So by end of September 25th, I realized we have managed to put about 25 looms up. And how do we challenge? By then, what happened is the word spread. These are societies, and some of the government is going to come and give you a package, is going to give you an offer. So they were sitting on the support they were getting. They were not moving ahead with fixing the looms. So that was one kind of concern as to how do we ensure that they also join the campaign. So on October 2nd, exactly 30 days after we said, okay, it's Gandhi Jayanti, let's celebrate and bring attention to the whole thing, saying that we have managed to fix about 40-45 looms in the shortest span of time. And so 2nd of October, we managed to put across 45 looms up, ready. We had a huge function to celebrate the 150th year of Mahatma Gandhi's birth anniversary. We ensured the political system, which we had kind of bifurcated or bypassed them to function. We went and got them as part of the project. So we had the MLAs and we had the district collector and everyone and come in. We had a huge, massive event just to tell the world that there is a possibility without a government intervention to bring back a craft society just with citizen effort. And so that was the first level. Many things happened simultaneously for us, and by November 15th, we had 95% of their looms ready. And also what happened simultaneously is something which had escaped our initial thing was by October 1st, when we were putting up a function for 2nd October, we also realized that there is a path which had devastations, and attention came to Chenamangalam. For us to run another campaign, we didn't have the steam to do that. So we went back to the administration, we went back to public sector companies. And between handloom and khadi, there were more than 800 families which were affected. In khadi, there were no other resource that could come from anywhere else. So it was only Save the Loom which kind of put back every single loom, every single charka, again within a span of 30-35 days. So in this entire process, what happened is we also realized that just fixing the looms did not serve the problem. This was kind of first-hand experience for us to realize and interact at the ground level that there is far more need for us to be here than sitting in Delhi, Bombay, speak about wanting to make a change, but nobody comes down and spends their time and effort. How do we do this? Is there a longer path that we need to do it? I thought of keeping my career aside. Fortunately for me, I had my friend who joined from Bombay. I had another friend of mine who was working with the Fashion Design Council, Alpi Boyla. She quit. She joined me in Cochin. So we had a team of 3 people and a few volunteers who we could kind of afford from our pockets. And we set on a mission that let's bring a larger picture to it, because the artisan in Kerala, in terms of dynamics in this particular place, the average age of a weaver is 45 plus. 92% of them are women. They're only 8% workforce. The basic thing, the concern that and troubled us constantly was these women were making just about 150 rupees a day. And that was what was constantly troubling us, that why are we fixing up a loom for somebody and pushing them back to the same surgery where they're going to make this kind of money? How do we change it? Is it so easy to change that structure, or do we need to go and work at every aspect? So that is what we did with Save the Loom. There was a series of things, and I always look back and think that there was as I told you, the guiding light which kept bringing us opportunities and spaces for us to kind of try and experiment those things. So Kochi for the last 10 years has been having one of the biggest art festivals in Asia, the Kochi Muziris Biennale, which also seemed to be a perfect and ideal platform for us to take and tell the story of what happened to the artisans, because this also comes from the Muziris belt. So that was in December 12th. So on one hand, we wanted to tell the story of what happened in the flood and how quickly they came back, how we managed to bring them back. On the secondary side, we also wanted to bring a certain amount of dignity to the weaver and say there is a pride in what a weaver is doing. We as a society never place them on a same pedestal in spite of the creativity that they do, in spite of the history that they carry with them. Culturally, they always pushed beyond a certain space. The first case which I went down and we found the loom functioning, uh, none of the three daughters took pride in the fact that their mother is a weaver. That troubled us. When the pictures of the mother came in the papers that they've saved the loom and put it back to work, and when I went back to their home, the daughters were a little disturbed with me as to why did you put mama's picture? Now the whole world knows she's a weaver. So there were these kind of problems which we started identifying, and so we worked with the Planning Board of Kerala to try and see that if the wages could be revised. The minimum wages were last revised in 2009 and 10, which was at 150. The coir industry in Kerala was getting almost 300. So we did that campaign with the government, which as of 2009, 19 September, the minimum wages has been increased to 350 rupees. So that was one systemic involvement and change which happened. In terms of what I was talking to you about the Kochi Binale, we tried and worked out a format where
Sorry. So I think we've lost the connection. What I'm going to do, sorry.
I'm just going to try and remove the video for Ramesh and bring him back in. But meanwhile, perhaps you've got some questions for Susan.
Yeah, I think what we can do now is let's get into the section, the next part, which is talking about the lockdown that we just went through. Susan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So what we'll do is let's move on to the next part of the discussion, which is to talk about industry and the lockdown, when the students had to close, what happened, because I think now it's over for you. When we started this series, I was about a month ago, and when we first spoke, it was not yet, lockdown was just opening. So if you could just take us through the journey of what happened.
Very quick.
And
just very quick, I want to say, Ramesh, your audio was breaking heavily. So I'm going to stop your video so the sound is better. I've just put you on mute now. So we're going to have Susan in for a bit and then we'll weave you back in. All right.
Okay. Can I start?
Yes, yeah, it's clear.
Can I go?
Yeah.
No, to start off, again, just to touch back on what industry, how did industry start and what is our core DNA? It's the producer at heart. We definitely want the woman to, get something in her hands to do by herself and to get an income. Neelam Chibbar, who's the founder of industry, that she's a designer by profession, but she is kind of, she feels a lot for people on the ground. So when this lockdown happened, it meant a complete halt to every activity. It was like overnight we said that, everything closes. No productivity means, of course, no income. This sudden and unprecedented change in our lives impacted all of us, more so the daily wage earners. Our producers are very dependent on their earnings, and they have been coached to think that this is your enterprise, this is where you will work and do things for yourself. Now everything shut down. Lockdown meant halt in sampling, halt in production, merely coming to a halt immediately. The stoppage also meant that the sampling closed. So that means that when you look into the future, you can see no future because there's no business for next season. Production stopped. That means there are no shipments. That means there are no sales, no revenue. Although our buyers were quite understanding, we work with people like IKEA. They were very understanding. So there was no cancellation on orders, and they were very supportive on, okay, when you get back, you can start delivering to us. but we all know where that stands. Greencraft, our natural fiber unit, had it even worse because we already had raw material in there. And we use raw material like banana bark, which if you kept, then it gets affected by humidity and it catches fungus and things like that. So it was for us a big hit. This thing was like too much of a stuff to come at us. So we had about 4,000 women in Greencraft, another 2,000 in Ekta doing apparel and embroidery. Now, what we did immediately after the close lockdown was that we created groups among ourselves, and the first thing we did was we contacted each and every producers of us. We just asked them two questions like, "How are you?" and "How's your family?" We just wanted them to know that we are there, even during these times when we can't come to them, they can't go to the enterprise to work. So we stressed that you have to stick to the instructions given by the government and the health authorities. Do not deviate from that. Just pay attention to your family's health. We also told them, don't worry about the earnings, because we will somehow see that they get their wages or earnings or whatever they were getting for the past months. We created then curriculums on health and hygiene. We made simple vocal and video based information. We started with making masks. So we kind of asked our producers which was their favorite Kannada or Tamil serials, and we enacted one of the favorite actors making a mask. So that kind of that message went across very strongly, and it was not a boring message. So our women started making masks for themselves and for their families first. We trained them on simple masks that they could do by hand stitch or machine stitch, or even if there is no stitch, just cut it and you make a mask. So that kind of gave them a purpose in life, because they've been working all through, so they don't want just money just given like that, because they also have dignity of labor. So they said that just coach us into doing something. So that's the first thing what we did. We just gave them all a purpose, saying that while you're staying at home, while you're taking care of your health and your family, there is something that you can do. Now what we have done is that after we have got our permission to open up the centers, we have opened it with very strict and strong processes in place. One is that we encourage people only who can walk to the enterprise to come, because there's no transport otherwise. Only those who can walk and who feel safe and who want to come can come there. People who don't have elderly at home or very small babies, we encourage them not to come to work. Yeah, and we've told them that if there's any symptoms of cough, cold, fever, please do not come to the center. At the center, we have very strict checks on temperature as soon as they walk in, and with the social distances marked, they walk in, and then we check everybody's temperature. And if there's anything out of the ordinary, we ask them to go back home. So far, that's not happened, thank God. So they come in there, and then each one is given a sanitizer. They sanitize themselves, and the machines and the seating at the Greencraft, where we are doing this natural fiber, is all socially, the distances are there for 2 meters. They're all 6 feet away. So the machines now have moved to have a table in the middle. So there's a machine, then a table, then a machine and a table. So that's the gap that we have given them. And we've also told them that, when you go out for tea or go for lunch or something, it should be staggered. All of them can't be going as a group. And they've all understood this. Everybody has understood this, and off and on we do checks. We speak with them. I have calls with them every day, and we look at the factory. I mean, everything is done remote now. We look at them. We have these Zoom meetings. We look at them. We speak to them. We tell them that, we are with you on this. If there's anything, any issues, you can stay at home. There's no issues. There's no pressure on, you need to come only at 9:30 and you can leave only at 5. They come in whenever it's convenient for them. So that's how we have started at both apparel and at the natural fiber. We've also told them simple things like, try not to go out again in the afternoon for lunch. If you can bring lunch from home, we provide masks. We have now the apparel factory, apparel enterprise is making masks because there's a huge demand of masks. So we are making those masks. We've given the first lot to all the producers and their family. And we also keep disposable masks there. In case somebody comes in with that, we give that, and then they have to discard it into a closed bin. So all that we have done, and that's how we have started. The strength is not much. It's about probably 10 to 15% women have come back. The other thing what we've also started is working from home. We have coached them into, like the baskets and things, weaving like that, they can make from home. On the apparel side, we checked as to who has machines at home and who don't have. Do they have a space for a machine for us to move the machine? We will move the single needle machines to their homes and they can start working. One good thing that's come out from this whole pandemic is that, it's opened our minds to homework. Otherwise, everybody would say, how can you give work, such kind of work to homes? But we have seen that this works now. We have given them embroidery work. We work with Fab India. So we have got permission from Fab India, to do some masks and dupattas with embroidery. So some of it go to the women's homes. They work from home for us. So this kind of is the positive thing. But in the whole thing, it is that we have come so much closer to the producer than before. We were very close to them anyways, but this has brought us all closer. And they are so much more confident about, working on their own, trying to work from home, not just sitting at home. We also hear that, there could be an increase on violence at home if the women are just at home. So that now taking work home or them coming to the center has helped. So that's how we are doing. I mean, we have restarted our facilities.
Sure. And your orders have, touch wood, they were standing from your various projects that were ongoing in future. Yeah.
So it's been staggered. The delivery dates are staggered, and they understand that, it could be, but we are not taking it easy. We are trying to see that, somehow we kind of get it out, because this is tough times even for the buyer. They need their product. So we are looking at that also, but thank God that, there are no cancellations of orders.
And one of the things we had discussed was the way that, because you had a remote system already in place to do things like quality control and checking, there was already a certain amount of, there was a network of communication exchange by remote that was already well established within your two enterprises.
Yeah, but the thing is, on the factory floor also we have paraprofessionals. We have quality people. All the production people are on the floor. It's only in the head office, we only have the merchandisers, the designers, people like that. And I would visit, say, every week. From Bangalore office, we would visit every week. Now that's not happening. That's not happening. But we, connect over Zoom, things like that. And every sample they make, they shoot a video, show it to us. The video is taken across the whole product. We look at it. We sign off on the product. Only then it goes into production. Because whatever said and done, quality you can't compromise. Yeah, deliveries maybe you can compromise, but quality never. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. It's really good news to hear that, and I hope that things only get better. Is there anything else you'd want to add to to sort of fill out the story for us in the future? Are you planning something? I mean, let's say, are you looking at it from the perspective that eventually, 50% of your workforce will be back, or are you planning on figuring out ways to keep going with work from home models? Are there any, plans? What are the plans?
Yeah. So the next plan is that we have spoken to all our producers and they are all willing to come back once the transport kind of comes back into action. But we will have more people impacted now because we are open to this. You know, people like big buyers are open to this, saying that, okay, we can work from home. Of course, you have to take care that there are no children involved, you know, the machines. What we have told very strictly is that the machines have to be closed up when the woman is not using it. Needles have to be taken off. Clothes or garments or masks have to be wrapped up and kept away. Those kind of things we will definitely take care of. I think it's only added to our kind of an advantage because now we are open to sending things home. Otherwise, even I come from a very corporate background where we say that no, you know what, everybody has to come to an office and work. Look at us. We have been working from home and we've been very productive, I think. You know, that we are having everything other than the face to face, which is a little bit of an issue. But otherwise, you know, and what we are also saying is that we are not adding anybody new to interact with the factory, with the enterprise, because we need a known face, you know, because we don't want to introduce somebody new there. So those are the things that, you know, and I mean, I think that, you know, the buyers are also opening up now and saying that, yes, if you can take care of the safety from home, why not? Why not let the woman work, because they will work for 2 or 3 hours and earn that much of money, which is good.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think now let's give it a shot to see how the connection is working. We'll get Mr. Ramesh Menon back on from Save the Loom. Hi.
Hi.
So when we sort of we were cut off around December 2019, and you were telling us about the Biennale. But I was wondering if we could move a little bit ahead and you know, discuss pre-lockdown. Well, what was the situation? What was happening with the Weaver clusters? You know, how were you able to achieve what you had set out to do to increase the incomes? And then how did the lockdown? How did that affect your work? And you know, bring us up to date on that.
So yeah, so the first 1 year we managed to push all these things and run multiple campaigns, programs, the Biennale thing and everything. And since so Kerala has the handloom industry technically has two main seasons for them where they do the large amount of business. The biggest business comes from Onam, which happens in August, September, and then there is the Vishu, which is the New Year in Kerala, which comes somewhere in April. And so between these two, they do the 90% of handloom sales happens because another reason being that the government also extends a 20% rebate on people buying the handloom products. So that's how technically the industry has been placed. The first year, in 2018, just before the Onam season, 25th was Onam, 15th the floods happened. They lost the goods, they lost everything, everything was destroyed. They didn't have the sales, so they went back in a bad shape. Last year, we managed to put them back and they had record sales, and around the same time, there was a second chance of floods coming back and it damaged certain amount of warps which were on the loom. So there was a certain amount of damage which happened. The Vishu season was on April 14th and the lockdown happened in Kerala 3 days prior to the national lockdown from the third week of March, somewhere on the 21st or 22nd of March. And so this year, there was no Vishu sales across the handloom sector in Kerala. So suddenly, again, they're stuck with a lot of stock for the festive season, and then has been no movement. So that has been one cause of concern, that how do you ensure that the stock gets moved? Another 2 months from now is Onam back again. So they had to start preparing for Onam, and the capital inflow would have been from the sales of Vishu, they would have uploaded back. So that hasn't happened. Secondary to that, there is about 40% of weavers are weaving from homes. It's cottage looms. So they managed to keep continuing weaving even during the lockdown. So that was one prospective side. During Vishu, we took it as a challenge, and there were many people who were wanting to support the weavers, knowing that what we were doing with them. So within Ernakulam, there are many people who reached out to us saying that at least symbolically we want to buy handloom. Is there any way we can do it? We managed to go back to the administration and seek special permission, and I don't think it has happened anywhere in lockdown, that we could take some stock and symbolically, ensure that there was a home delivery of handloom products, and we gave them a small token sale just to keep the spirit alive. Um, on the other hand, with the khadi industry, what happened is much earlier we had foreseen the situation of the need for masks, because the N95 mask and the other non-woven masks were already in short supply in Kerala. And Kerala also being in the forefront of fighting COVID from January end itself, uh, most of these things were uh, uh, kind of anticipated by us to what is going to be. So somewhere on the 10th or 11th of March, the Khadi production centers, we started testing out these masks. Um, uh, so the basic thing was to train the women in the Khadi production centers and give them the necessary employment to produce the mask. And as it went into the lockdown, uh, we ensured that this could be a reason to keep them occupied. And so the fabric was supplied and taken to different homes of these about 100 odd women who we had trained. And the making of masks started, and that picked on. And from there, the Khadi board, the KVIC, has gone national with it somewhere by the end of soon after lockdown. And they've kind of, all the Khadi institutions in India are making masks now. And the capacity that remains is we can make about 5,000 masks and keep these 100 odd women occupied. And that has been happening through the lockdown. And so that's one thing which we foresaw, and we were able to do it. So close to about 100,000 masks have already been made by these centers and distributed to the frontliners, the police team in Kerala, to the administration, and for people to buy it as a basic necessity. And it's not comes with a designer tag or a pricing or anything. It's a basic utility which you can buy just for 15 or 20 rupees. And so that has been mass produced, and so that's keeping them occupied in the khadi places. With the handloom, what has happened is somewhere in October last year, we had started a campaign where we have an in-house team now of designers and professionals and collaborators whom we are working with. We are working with a lot of design brands to try and ensure that they can use this Kerala textile and see newer forms of developing it, which was the outcome of what we did during the Biennale. So we have designer Anuj Sharma from Ahmedabad who took it to a Bangladesh Fashion Week. We had Karishma Shani who took the textile and showcased it in Tranoi. So almost all designers have used this beautiful khadi and handloom from Kerala in very interesting perspective. So we have an in-house team to now develop textiles and work on ensuring that they have better wages, which is only the first concern. What we are also looking at doing that is how do we ensure that the entire supply chain, from the time the yarn comes into the yarn bank, which supplies the yarn further to all the societies, till it becomes a final product and thereon, how can we enrich the experience of making it in a certain situation and a space, so it does not end only with increasing or ensuring the higher wages to them. Most of these weaving centers are in dilapidated situation. So if you don't ensure a good working space or a good this thing, we will not be able to bring the young into weaving. The fortunate thing that happened during the entire process of reviving Chennamangalam, we had a surplus of 42 women who came back and took up weaving again. So when we were sitting with 2073 looms to be repaired, and the fear that we might lose half of them if the looms are not repaired in time, when we finished the entire process of revival, we had 40 new people. So if we show them the light of the craft, giving them sufficient sustenance, there will be more young people wanting to come into it. And how do you bring them? So we have run a campaign with 25 weavers in Chennamangalam, where we are ensuring them a minimum wage of 600 rupees, now going double of what the government has ensured, and starting the product manufacturing process or the development process from that angle as to when we pay 600 rupees, what is the product that we need to develop which can fetch a better value in the market. The conventional product which is made is not giving themselves sufficient sustenance for them to live. So 600 rupees with the 20 days of working can ensure that a weaver takes back 12,000 rupees home from a 3,000 to 3,000, 4,000 what they were making prior to the floods. So that entire process has been started off as an experiment basis. On the secondary level, what we are trying to do is build one of the kind of newer spaces for them, which we are looking at kind of to be a modern live museum of weaving, where it's not only they're going to practice their craft, but also ensuring that it's an aspirational space for these people to come and weave. And it kind of becomes a live museum where people can come and see them at work without disturbing the spaces of their work. Right now, it's all cramped up. They don't even have fresh air or ventilation or any of those facilities available to them. Today, the workforce being larger women, we also need to ensure that there are better hygiene, there are better sanitation facilities and things like that, which is required for these women to come and comfortably work. So we have got on board one of the finest sustainable architects in this country, Vinu Daniel, who's designing this entire modern weaving center for us. And over the next year or two, again, we are going to look at a parallel system as to, without interfering much with the functioning of a cooperative system, how do you kind of give them a support mechanism by which they can come to a working space, which becomes aspirational. So the workplace is as good as somebody going to a call center. You go to a working center, which is where you weave, has all the facilities that they can think of. So that's one. Second is the wages. Third is the product level. How do you ensure that the product goes on to a superior level? And so this is how the entire thing has been happening now. Unfortunately, somewhere towards the 2 weeks ago, West Bengal and Odisha faced the brunt of the cyclone, and that also kind of displaced a whole lot of artisans and weavers and people who are working in that part of the world. And it kind of became a concern because last year during the floods in Assam, about 47,000 weavers were affected, and there was not a single call of cry to help them out. We could do it with about 800 people here in Kerala and set a formula or an example or a so-called Kerala model to revive traditional craft sectors which gets affected by the natural calamities. But when it happens elsewhere, it also troubles us that there is no voice which is being raised, or people are being sensitized to what happens. I mean, these are the only belts where the Northeast and the Northeastern states consumes about 70% of Indian artisan craftsmen are based there. But when a natural calamity comes and destroys these basic structures of them and destroys their home, their looms, everything that they've earned, it kind of disturbs that as a society, as civil people, we tend to celebrate handloom at every single platform and put it at a high pedestal. We also need to ensure that these people have the basic resources to sustain or come back or fight these natural adversities which they face constantly. And it's an increasing phenomenon that you'll have floods or cyclones or earthquakes coming and destroying these spaces where most of them are self-reliant or dependent and start working. So we've started a new project in West Bengal as we talk now. We've identified one small sector of in Kalna in East Bardhaman district, which has about 35 weavers who have been affected. So we're trying to start one step of kind of reviving those looms. It does not need a great amount of money, but we have managed to kind of figure out the ways out as to how do we revive them. And not only that, also ensure a better marketing facility. That is the biggest cry for every artisan community across the country, that they don't have the right placement for marketing their products, besides all the interventions and everything, what you say. The last census of handloom in India put out that about 35 lakh people are engaged in this craft, which is 1 million people less than what it was in 2010. So the numbers are declining on one hand. On the other hand, we have city-based enterprises or the fashion industry as such wanting to do certain things now in the last decade or so with the handloom sector. With now, technically, we're wanting to say that these are rural spaces or the people have to be working in the craft sector back in the villages. That has been the tradition and practice for centuries that you can think of. India is one specific space, which I keep saying that every 50, 100 kilometers, there are three things which very constantly changes, is language, food, and clothing. And the forms of how it is developed within an ecosystem. We have destroyed the ecosystem in most parts of this country. And today is the time that we need to go back and create systems around it so that it can sustain and flourish. Without the emphasized factor of it being a charity, it being a social responsibility, it has to come back for what it is. And that's kind of thing which when we started Save the Loom, we do not put ourselves in the space of an NGO or how an NGO conventionally functions. We still call ourselves as a social platform which is open to a whole lot of collaborations with people with whatever resources they have in whatever form they have. They're creative designers, they are textile developers, anybody who has something to work with these artisans and take the craft forward. We are looking at various mechanisms to do that. So that is something what is constantly happening. As we were working in the handloom and khadi sector, the state government requested us to kind of give resource to the coir sector, which was affected equally in the floods. So we used our expertise of what we tried to create from these two and give back the resource in terms of that. So as we moved ahead, Save the Loom does not now signify our presence only in the so-called handloom sector. We have kind of largely placed ourselves in spaces where there's any hand skill in this country and is losing its space or is fighting for certain survival or is losing for its kind of visibility in terms of many things which they're lacking, or if they're lacking a voice to reach to a certain audience and space, we would like to step in there and provide whatever resources we can generate or kind of bring it to them. One particular example is within Kerala, within Kochi, there's a particular space where there's this 300-year-old Dobi Khana which has been existing from the times of the Dutch. And this was a Tamil community which was brought by the king then to wash the uniform for the Dutch army, and that's been continuing for the longest time. Today, about 40 odd families is what remains in that space, and they continue the traditions of last 300 years. The lockdown actually threw them out of gear because they were also largely dependent on small donations, which these foreigners used to come and look at the Dobi Khana as a kind of a tourist spot, and they used to drop some money into their donation box, which kept them surviving besides the work that they used to do. Lockdown ensured that these 40 have no work with them. The hotels have shut down, which used to give them the clothes to launder, and suddenly they have been left with no support system. They're not even getting the so-called ration and other Manrega schemes which is getting applied to them. So how do you bring a resource and preserve a certain part of culture which we have been living for so long, and which we showcase to the world as, this is a Dobi Khana which has a history, which has everything. The whole lot of international tourists and travelers come and look at it as an aspect of wonderment. Somewhere in our backyard, we are letting them kind of finish completely. How do you bring resource to them? So what we did was sometime in March, we started a project. We said, when you're weaving something by hand, why don't we ensure that we add more processes to it till the time it reaches the consumer? And can a sari give, or any product of hand woven can give employment to more people? The saying is that when you engage a weaver to do a weaver product, it gives employment to 6 people on the back, from the people who are processing the warp to all the people who dye. So there's a complete set of people who get employed. A power loom takes away a whole lot of employment on that factor. So what we have done is now the saris or the products which is getting made also gets finished by hand by people, by women who are there in that particular town. Further down, what we did was we took them to these washermen and said, let's de-starch these pre-starched products. And instead of sending it to a central processing to get them de-starched, we gave it to these washermen to see how they can do it and go conventionally to do it. Very interestingly, that washing the saris in Dobi Khana, it's a fresh new product, and sun drying it and ironing back in the old format with those heavy 7-8 kilo charcoal iron. And the product is coming up with providing employment for 3 more people just by adding 100 rupees more to the product. So that is an interesting template which we are trying out and seeing how does it work. Can we increase the number of hands that goes beyond the product, and it can keep more employment in these spaces that we call the rural spaces. The ecosystem needs to be preserved. Each part of India has an amazing craft ecosystem, and it's not so late that we can move away from saying that it's dying or it needs saving. It needs to be celebrated. The artisan needs to be placed in a certain pedestal, and their profession needs to be looked at with the same level of equality as to what you give to any other professional. I mean, tell me one profession where a person's multiple senses are engaged for a long span of time, day in, day out. Even a doctor does a surgery for probably a 45 minutes to an hour or 2 hours, helped by 6 people. But when a woman is weaving on a loom, sitting on a plank of wood which does not even have a backrest, she's using her foot, she's using her hand, she's using her eyes to look at every single strand of thread which goes on the weave, and also using her brain to look at the design, which has no template, which has no computer graphs, and weaving a product, and that she does it for 8 hours. So I don't think there are very many professions or any profession you can point out which uses multiple senses of a human being for a constant time of hours every single day. And what you get at the end of the day is probably a few meters of fabric. There's nothing more beautiful than that. That handloom or handmade products needs to be placed at the highest pedestal of luxury. And unfortunately, in this country, we never gave that space because we already decided it's in excess. When we touch and feel something which is made in Italy, made in Australia, anywhere else, we're willing to pay the premium because they make only that little handmade products.
Interviewing with
a country which does.
Ramesh, on that point, on your website, you say your mission to etch handmade in India, tag in global fashion,
yes.
luxury lexicon. Can you elaborate that point, because you've it's a call to action essentially. So could you just tell us what you mean by
No,
that?
see,
Maybe summarize it.
what you're looking at is anything which is hand touched and handmade has its own essence in terms of, like, it carries the soul of the person who's making it. It's in limited quantity. If a woman in Chennaimangalam can weave 150 to 200 saris a year, there's no way I can make her weave 500 saris. So what the handmade artisans are going to produce in anywhere in any part of the world or any part of India is completely exclusive in its own space. Every product made every single day, even if it's the same design, is a new product, it's a new piece.
Yeah.
We need to place it and market it as in the highest form of luxury.
Yes, but
You know?
your action,
So,
very simply for somebody to do something. I just, because you summarize it very briefly, but somebody that doesn't know the mission of Save the Loom, when you say tag a luxury product, so if I've purchased a luxury product that I can see has had handwork or etc., I should tag then who? Who do I tag? Perhaps you could just simplify it for the audience in terms of what is that
correct.
action?
No, so that is what it's exactly like the campaign Fashion Revolution has been, to quote it as revolutionarily been putting across as who made my fabric, who made my garment, who made my this. So the transparency level is of celebrating the person who's actually been behind it. So every Chennaimangalam product that goes from our hand has a package, has a product label, which specifies this is the weaver, this is a picture, this is a photograph, this is the woman she is, and a small snippet of the story of the person who's making it. Also, the team that Ataran does is not only give them, they don't need the design input. A weaver is a fabulous designer in themselves because they have the skill set without going to any school or formal education. They make finest products. We guide them with the market information as to what is the trend forecast or what kind of designs or what kind of colors to use, so that a product comes in which is universally acceptable than being sold in a specific area of space or attracting a certain limited market. So what has been made, for example, in Kerala was largely is consumed by Keralites or Malayalis across the world. There is no secondary market that we ever thought of or created for it. The example that we did during the Biennale was the finest thing, where we collaborated with about 20 artists, designers and designer brands from India, including Rajesh Pratap to Himanshu Shani to David Abraham. So we had the finest artists work on a single textile, a single meterage, which we gave to all of them, that everybody had two basic men's dhoti and 5 of those towels in Kerala, what we call torta. We send it across the same off-white khadi product to these 20 designers and ask them that if they could make anything with it, which we could make it as a part of an exhibition and retail it during the Biennale. For us, these 20 designers put together about 55 garments in the shortest span of time. And during Biennale, we had one textile taking 55 different forms. The consumption of that happened, and the consumers who bought those garments were the finest people from across the world. So today you can see Kora Khadi woven in a small tiny village in Kerala, worn by the topmost or the highest paid curator in the world in New York. So we had that kind of an interaction to place the product in a certain kind of luxury space, which we look at it, is to where can we take the craft of India? What does it lack in terms of visibility on a global space, and what as an experience can we build around it? The product is luxurious. The market demand for it, for a handmade product, is far more from outside India than within the country. The moment government intervention or support comes in, we always tend to look at it, or the system kind of compels you to make a mass product. And that's where we go wrong, because a Chennaimangalam product, what is made in Chennaimangalam, is only available to the people in that 20 kilometers. So the people in 20 kilometers want a product which is accessible to them. So a 2-meter dhoti has to be sold for 500 rupees. A power loom makes it for 125 rupees and pushes into the market. That dhoti is not worn outside Kerala. So what do I do with the 2 meters, and how do I ensure today when I have to pay them higher wages, how do we pay them 800 rupees?
Sure. I think
so the moment you pay 800 rupees,
it's an ongoing challenge to find new ways to, especially. How's that?
Yeah, that's good.
No, I mean it's interesting. I mean it's early days in the sense that your organization has done a huge amount and gained so much traction, and we're going to have to wrap up this session soon. And we just wanted to sort of highlight, where we are at today, and how, if the handloom clusters, whom Save the Loom has been engaging with and nurturing and fostering, how have they been affected by the lockdown? And is there anything that we can share with our audiences, for both organizations? So one of the reasons we paired these organizations is because they function in areas which are very different from the other places we have featured, where they are dealing with the rural on-the-ground realities, which are very different from people who work out of big cities, or even somebody like our first conversation, where the supply chain started off with the organic cotton farmers, but eventually ended up in different points of sale across India. So we wanted to do a session where we talked about on-the-ground realities and people who work and nurture livelihoods and artisans in places which are physically challenging. And the beauty of both these organizations is that there's a lot of seasonal factors, there's a lot of geography factors, there's a lot of social factors which influence and affect how they've had to build themselves. And these challenges are going to get more unique and more specific as and when the climate changes, as and when new diseases, sorry to say this, descend upon us. And of course, and how the marketplace, the marketplaces that they deal with will be affected by those as well. Whether you're making products for an IKEA or you're making products for the best top designers of India, and you're preserving handicrafts, everybody is in this together. And how do we figure out what is that basic social fabric that is currently been missing, which is the reason why both these organizations have had to start and had to be formed, because there was so many gaps in providing livelihoods, in providing training, in preserving artisan, in preserving knowledge. So that was the reason why we sort of brought them together. And I was hoping we would have some questions from the audience on either one of the two or both. Anybody? If not, then I'm just going to ask Susan, is there any call to action for our Fashion Revolution audience? Is there anything we can do that industry needs at the moment? Is there fundraising initiatives? Are there is there anything like the Save the Loom has a very clear campaign where you amplify the message Save the Loom? And I was just wondering, is there something that industry needs right now that we didn't cover in the first part of the conversation?
We have started a movement on, designed, like say the wristband or, embroidered bands, things like that, which we have started, which we will be putting up onto a website where the brands or anybody can come in and kind of purchase that. It will be at a premium, but the funds that we are raising through that will directly go to the artisans. So this is under discussion. We will be setting that up shortly. So I could share the link with you a little later. Yeah.
Please do. We will definitely share that one. Yeah. Thanks to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us on Friday evening and suffering internet speeds and sharing your stories. We find both these organizations to be quite visionary and quite wonderful, and we really look forward to being in touch and seeing how we can collaborate as Fashion Revolution in the future. And thank you so much for everybody who logged on to listen to us. And we will be back with more of these in a couple of weeks. Until then, everybody, please take care. One last thing, Suki, we just wanted to shout out to some of our colleagues.
Massive thank you to Shruti Singh in Delhi and Mehda in Mumbai, without whom we wouldn't have been able to put together today's session. So our regional coordinators are far and wide in India. We've got coordinators in Calcutta, in Bangalore, in Delhi, in Mumbai, in Jaipur. And we're growing. So thank you all to our contributors. And in terms of Save the Loom and industry, we'll be sharing links for their call to actions in our Instagram stories. So anybody that wants to do more to support these organizations and to know more, you'll have links and be able to go to them direct. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you,
Thank
Anna.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Suki. Thank you,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks
for
and
listening.
bye.
Thank you so much, Susan. I
Thank
hope we
you.
have more conversations and more time in the future.
Yeah.
And as placed in the chat, we will be placing the recorded sessions on our YouTube page next week, and we'll inform everyone via Instagram. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much.